Welcome back to Season 4 of the DDI podcast. In this season, we're bringing together world leaders from the technology ecosystem to demystify AI and challenge the myths surrounding the technology. My name is Mark Yeeles. I'm the Vice President of Schneider Electric's Secure Power Division here in the UK and Ireland. And my guest today is David Hogan, NVIDIA's Vice President of Enterprise in EMEA. Here's what you can expect next.
I think we've been used to using AI for quite some time. It's just not been as obvious. Well, if you can just take away 80% of the burden in terms of reviewing images, that has a massive impact on the efficiency of the health system. I think it's a holistic view that needs to be developed, and it's something NVIDIA is very passionate about. I think every nation needs to think about its own data sovereignty and the ability to produce AI, which is in essence producing intelligence. And it is very much an ecosystem. It needs every player to come together and deliver those elements.
David, welcome to the show.
Great to be here. Thank you.
Thank you, David. Well, let's start, as I like to start all of these podcasts with you personally. I wonder if you could share with me and our listenership your career journey to NVIDIA and some of your most memorable moments during that period.
Well, I think for anybody who's been involved with NVIDIA, it's been quite the journey. But it didn't start 2 years ago with ChatGPT. It started for me 8.5 years ago when I was hired into the business to build an AI business. Now, when you sit down with someone like Jensen and say, okay, how do I go about doing that? He says, well, go figure it out. And that really says an awful lot about NVIDIA. It's really focused on how we think about building what we call a $0 billion market. So we started to look at how AI could transform industries, which industries could adopt AI the quickest, and then how would we start to enable those industries to be successful with AI. And that's really the journey we've been on for the past 8.5 years, nearly 9 years now. And obviously, in the last couple of years, we've seen the real transformation of AI that's kind of exploded onto the public consciousness through the likes of ChatGPT and other generative AI models. And that's really been the kind of, if you like, the iPhone moment or the big bang moment of AI. But it's been a long journey to get there and a lot of work to create the market that is there today. And that's what NVIDIA is about, really, enabling the market for AI.
And David, when you think of, I mean, that's a very rapid and snappy firing kind of view of your career in NVIDIA. And I love the go figure it out comment, by the way. Often the best ideas come from that level of thinking. But before you joined NVIDIA, how was your career shaped up until that point?
Well, before NVIDIA, I had a long history working in telecommunications and IT, working for companies like BT and Virgin, and also for storage companies like NetApp. And it's very much a typical corporate career of, working, running different divisions, developing strategies, opening new markets, working internationally. So pretty typical, I would think, for many people who've worked in the technology space. And then I was, rather surprised to get a phone call from NVIDIA. And at the time, NVIDIA was kind of in stealth mode from an AI point of view.
Right.
NVIDIA had been working on AI since about 2012, working with some of the real sort of founders of AI and in terms of this sort of latest wave, Jan LeCun and various other players. And I've been working on the technology for several years and been trying to persuade the industry really to develop the technology and bring it to market. And it was taking a lot of time, and not everybody was fully sure about whether AI would be the next thing. And Jensen, being Jensen, said, okay, well, if you don't believe it, we will go do it. And therefore, I got a phone call from somebody I knew and said, would you like to have a conversation with a company called NVIDIA? Now, I'm not the biggest gamer in the world. I kind of heard of NVIDIA, but I was like, why would NVIDIA want to speak to me? I'm probably not the sort of leading gamer in the world or understand that market particularly well. But after the conversations, the vision that Jensen and the leadership team showed me in terms of how AI will be transformative for every industry and for society, and that journey he believed that we need to go on, I was completely sold. So I kind of joined a startup on the side of a gaming company. That's how we really started the AI business. And, for a long time, we were trying to explain to many organizations who NVIDIA was, why we pivoted to AI, and how it could transform the industry we're in. So, yeah, it's literally been building from scratch.
And I guess, you fast forward, don't you, 8 years from the start, and it's hard to go a day or even an hour without hearing Nvidia in the press at any point in time. And there's no arguing really that AI is the top of everybody's agenda, and it's, as I said, it's dominating news, isn't it? But let's do some myth busting for a few people, because there's a lot of three-letter acronyms out there. There's a lot of things we might need to get off the table. What should people really know about AI, and have we been using it without even realizing it ourselves?
Well, to that point, I think most people have probably used Siri or Alexa or another
Right.
sort of agent. That's just voice recognition. Um, so that's really just how it started to evolve into people's lives. But AI has been used for several years by many technology companies. I mean, if you think about the concept of search, using a search engine, search has not been searched for a long time. Actually, it's recommendation based on your previous interests, the things you like. It starts to recommend things for you. You look at some of the things on some of the streaming channels, Netflix, for example. That's all
Yes.
recommendation. This isn't really about actually you choosing to certain things. It is things being recommended to you by machine learning and AI. And therefore, I think we've been used to using AI for quite some time. It's just not been as obvious. And I think the concept of AI has been quite abstract because there's been a lack of human element. But if you think about how you use a large language model, that's where you directly interface with AI. It's very similar experience. So people start to realize the power of AI because they can ask it questions and it will give you answers. It will give you insight. It will give you information that you've not been able to grasp earlier. So the power of AI is now in the hands of the many, not just in a few data scientists who knew how to use it before. So it's quite transformative in terms of the human experience. And I think that's really the direction AI is going in terms of how people experience AI. It's very much something they will interact with, either directly through using agents or chatbots, or equally in terms of robotics, which is probably the next wave of things that's going to come about.
Well, maybe we'll come back to robotics in a short while, but thank you for that. And I think the interesting topic that you raised there is around the humanization of AI and how we can all become interactors with the AI bots, etc. But I'm just going to move us on to something now that I think which really draws out that human aspect of AI, and that is the benefits of AI, in particular around research and development and disease prevention in particular. Um, and can it, in your mind, can we see continual growth and, the dawn of AI help us solve some of those challenges that we're seeing in the healthcare sector and beyond? And can you see them coming at a faster pace than we've probably ever seen them before?
Yeah, I think so. I think AI is one of those true areas where we can make a real transformation in the field of healthcare. I mean, image recognition already is having a dramatic impact on what systems can detect. I think there's been a lot of publicity around things in breast cancer and other areas where AI is much more successful at detecting early diagnosis of disease versus some of the traditional methods, etc. But also, there's some really simple ways to think about it as well. If you're a radiologist and you're looking at, potentially hundreds of different images a day, maybe even thousands, it's very, very difficult to remain accurate. And actually, the volume of what you can cope with is relatively limited. So just by AI reducing the load on radiologists, it can have a massive impact on the healthcare system. So many of the, if you think about chest x-rays, most radiologists who see x-rays, 80% of them are fine. There is nothing to report. It is perfectly normal. No disease to report. Please carry on. Well, if you can just take away 80% of the burden in terms of reviewing images, that has a massive impact on the efficiency of the health system. So there are different ways of looking at it. Yes, it's very much bleeding edge in terms of what it can detect, but equally, it can also be a lot more efficient at doing the simpler things, which is actually saying everything's fine. So I think AI has a real benefit to the healthcare system. But I think a lot of people also think about, drug discovery and how it could transform that. And I just think we saw quite a bit of that during the pandemic, where AI was deployed to reduce the number of targets for some of the drug development that was done to speed the efficiency of the vaccine development. And that's clearly demonstrated to the whole industry the power of that. And NVIDIA has something called BioNemo, which is one of our models that focuses on drug discovery, that reduces some of the time to process some of that data and identify some of the key target areas. So that's just one example that has a real
Mm.
impact on the healthcare system. And if you can think, it normally takes up to 10 years to bring the drugs to market. If you can shorten that cycle, that has a massive impact from a patient perspective. But that is obviously right at the bleeding edge of science, as I've mentioned with some of the other areas. But
Mhm.
if you think about it, there are many things in the health system which would benefit from AI. If you think about the number of appointments that are missed, for example, in the
Of
UK
course.
in the
Yeah.
NHS, that's a huge burden and cost to the whole healthcare system, and obviously the efficiency of that. If you think about using AI to identify when appointments might be missed and the pattern of behavior and reach out to people to ensure that there will be appointments, the efficiency rates in the health system increase really substantially. So we're in conversation with different departments of the health system, with the UK government, saying how AI can really transform the health system and other parts of government for the benefit of society, because there are simple things it can do as much as the bleeding edge science.
Well, I think we've just picked on one sector there, and we've probably just scratched the surface, haven't we? Just by looking at healthcare, and there are many, many other industries that are going to benefit from AI moving forward. But I think that's a really good um, it's a really good case study to show how AI can benefit all across the globe. So I'm looking forward to having that deeper conversation with you just around healthcare for sure. But when you think now, and I change gears slightly, but when you think now, because obviously you work across Europe, and the AI wave has definitely landed across Europe. We know this for a fact. But in your view, how are governments doubling down on the efforts to capitalize on AI, and what are they thinking about right now to help them move at a faster rate or a more effective rate?
I think governments are thinking about it in two distinct ways. One is the economic value. I think governments are now realizing that all their industries need to be able to compete in this new world of AI to remain internationally competitive. So if their economies are going to remain strong, they need to drive that. I think also the second half of that sort of thinking is really about sovereignty. I think every nation needs to think about its own data sovereignty and the ability to produce AI, which is in essence producing intelligence. And the big question for governments is, should I allow my nation to sort of buy in intelligence, or should I trade my data, or should I produce it myself? And most nations are of the view that for many of the aspects, they want to produce their own intelligence. And that's really the essence of sovereign AI. And that's where you see a lot of the national sort of thinking on that, in terms
Mhm.
of we need to use our own data for the benefit of our own citizens, but also then how do we support our industries, transforming with the benefit of AI. And so reflecting back on some of my comments earlier about the healthcare system, one of the biggest challenges for most developed countries is productivity. Productivity is pretty much flatlined across most developed countries for the last 20 years. And it's one of the biggest challenges we all face, particularly with aging populations and other things. How do we drive the growth in the economy? And that obviously leads to investment, taxation, all of the benefits that you get from growth. And AI is the one thing really that is transformative in the sphere right now, which would really impact productivity. And not by 1 or 2x, but potentially by 10, 20, 50, 100x in certain areas, which will really have a dramatic impact on the growth and the prosperity of certain organizations and equally certain economies. So those elements together are top of mind really for most governments.
And do you think the governments across Europe and just governments generally, do you see a willingness and an acceptance that it's a total ecosystem? Not it's not just Schneider Electric or NVIDIA or anybody else for that matter. It's a complete ecosystem because I think you touched on it a few moments ago talking about robotics. So as you know, I used to work. That was my world probably only a few years back, and you're right. From a G7 perspective and from a global standpoint, the UK as one example was a particular underperformer in the adoption of robotics. And do you think, therefore, the government are thinking that holistically about how to solve for a number of challenges, not just one or two?
I hope so. I actually think they are really listening to industry, to people like NVIDIA and to others, realizing, to your point, it is an ecosystem. There are very few organizations in the world that have the skills and capability to put all this together. It is about collaboration between startups, academia, industry, the government, research, etc. Bringing all those elements together and really starting to drive transformation. In fact, we have a concept called an AI Center of Excellence, which is the idea of bringing together all those parties to work on some of the most challenging areas in development of AI, be it for a sort of national development, national large language models, or thinking about how they support their core industries, etc. A great example is the work we did in Denmark with the Danish government, Novo Nordisk Foundation, and Novo Nordisk. That really shows how that center is all those elements within it, really to transform the industry. And I think you reference robotics, that is the next frontier. And no single organization, despite what they say, are likely to have all the elements to develop those robots of the future. Now, robotics has taken a big leap forward recently, as I'm sure you're aware. The ability to use large language models to program robots is a fantastic step forward because it's been incredibly complex and difficult before. So, to some extent, the barrier of entry has been lowered, but actually, to your point, it needs the ecosystem to come together to really start to scale out how you would deploy robots, across the whole industry.
Yeah, I like that, and I think robotics is one aspect, of course. So that's one part, a tiny little part of that ecosystem we've been talking about. I guess if I was thinking about the pillar that joins us all together, though, and all parts of this ecosystem, is probably the sustainability or the decarbonisation of industry more broadly. And whilst AI tools promise to help the energy transition, in the short term, they require significant compute power, of course, which translates to it's an increased electricity consumption, as we know. So how will the technologies, do you think, evolve over time to address this particular challenge?
No, you're quite right. There's a lot of talk about obviously the growth in the number of data centers, the power required, etc. But I think you need to see it as a new wave of computing. AI computing is a very efficient way of computing. And if you look at the sort of top 500 list of supercomputers in the world, you'll see, and then sort of green 500, you will see that's dominated by GPU based compute systems from the likes of NVIDIA. That really is transformative in terms of that density of compute, i.e., the amount of compute power you can get for the energy that obviously is consumed and also the physical footprint of that compute platform. So it is very much about how you think about that. Many of those systems are obviously using renewable energy. So again, there's an element of that which is quite transformative. But also, you have to realize that the sort of software landscape that we all have lived in for the past 20 to 30 years, in terms of the types of applications that we use, etc., are all about to change with generative AI. So, what you'll think is a lot more workloads moving to AI. Traditional software use cases will move to being delivered by large language models and other models, which will start to deliver those in a different way and a more efficient way. So actually, I think you'll see a big transition away from traditional x86 CPU computing to the likes of GPU computing, which will start to transform that. And then you'll also see a lot of traditional workflows having to be accelerated to increase their efficiency. So one of the things that NVIDIA gets involved in beyond just AI is actually accelerating a lots of those existing applications to make them more efficient. So whilst yes, I think there's going to be some significant growth in data centers and power consumption over the next few years, I also think a lot of the traditional data centers will start to transform over time to this more energy efficient type model.
Yeah, that's very interesting. So I think we've kind of blended I guess the discussion around robots and the discussion around sustainability. We've used robots as an example, in fairness, but sustainability will become an even bigger challenge for us. But also, David, I wanted to get your perspective on the kind of third party wins or scope three, as we might like to call it in the industry, because AI will solve for some of those biggest challenges in other industries, won't it? It's not just the compute industry that's where we want to hone our energy and our focus into. You can see a road to taking out quite a bit of carbon from the rest of the world and the rest of the industry too, right?
I know that's right. I mean, if you think about just in terms of efficiency, if you think of the work we do with the likes of Shell on what we call CCS, which is basically carbon capture, the ability to repurpose obviously the wells that exist today and actually use them for carbon capture, or the work we do supporting wind turbines and actually modeling wind turbines and looking at how they operate together, how you can get the most efficiency across different wind farm fields, etc. There are many areas where we can impact the energy system directly, but equally we can work with different industries, looking at how they can improve their supply chains and they can be more efficient in terms of how they distribute goods around the world, the type of goods they use, identifying the best sources of different products, etc. Can really drive efficiency and therefore reduce overall carbon footprint. So there are many examples how you do things like that in terms of, things like in simple things like predictive maintenance, the ability to determine when things are becoming inefficient and being able to intervene earlier, stop failure, which obviously has an economic cost, but also has a carbon footprint cost as well if you don't get these things right. So there are many things you can do that have a significant impact on the carbon footprint of different industries.
Yeah, I think you're right, David. And we're particularly focused at Schneider in terms of this topic because we see it as I think we used the word ecosystem earlier. Well, this is a whole eco body almost of how do we decarbonize, not just in our own industry but beyond. So we've been looking at the way that um, we remove carbon from the products that we make. So some of our latest products are 70% less in embodied carbon, as an example. We now start to think about, well, how do we move our products around the world in the most sustainable way possible? It's not. I mean, these are very complex topics, of course they are, but we're trying to think more broadly outside of the energy meter at a factory. So I think these are all exciting opportunities for us because the AI sphere can help us solve for some of these, of course. So yeah, we're looking forward to shaping the future of this alongside companies like NVIDIA. So yeah, we're very proud of what we've achieved at Schneider Electric, in particular on this topic. Um, one question I had for you though was clearly you work with a number of hyperscalers, fair comment, and probably a number of colos too. And in the infrastructure that you see today, how close are we, do you think, to seeing a fully automated, who knows, even a robot-driven data center? Is that close? Do you think?
Um, I think you've seen many key elements already there already. We work with, as you say, the hyperscalers, with organizations as yourself, and we have a number of NVIDIA cloud partners all across the EMEA region who weekly are building out sovereign clouds for organizations. So what you're seeing, I think, is the transformation of the data center industry. The data center that supports AI is very different from a data center would support the traditional hyperscaler. It's very much a scale up rather than scale out architecture. And that involves things like liquid cooling, obviously increased sort of power density as much as compute density. So I think we're already thinking through how we transform that industry. And it is very much an ecosystem. It needs every player to come together and deliver those elements. And I think we're as part of that looking about automation. How do we make these things most efficient? And I think going forward, you talk of robotics, most people think of them as some sort of humanoid robot. That's what we consider a robot, or maybe a dog, or one of the ones we're used to seeing from things like Boston Dynamics. But actually, we need to think about buildings being robots. Going forward, data centers, factories will be robots, and we're starting to see that intelligence being built into some data centers. And if you look at the work we did with XAI, where we supported them building out a 100,000 GPU cluster in 19 days, part of that was achieved through using robotics. We were using robots to start doing that deployment. So this is already happening. I just think it will become more widespread and really transform how quickly you can build out these data centers. One of the biggest challenges is the speed in which we need to operate. 2 or 3 years ago, if you've asked someone, I want to build a supercomputer, they'll have written an RFP, and maybe 2.5, 3 years later, they would have a system operational. Now we can build some of the biggest systems in the world in a matter of weeks, if not a couple of months. And that's really transformative. And that really reflects the speed of change which is happening in the industry. But it's a challenge for everybody. We're all going through those challenges. I think you yourselves are really having to ramp to meet that challenge in terms of how the industry is transforming. And as you say, it's very much an ecosystem to develop that.
Yeah, and and you're right. We are our R&D departments are working full bore to try and I don't want to say catch up, but almost meet the demands of the industry and try and be thought leaders ourselves in the tech that helps build the architecture of the future. Now we've touched on AI, we've touched on robot, we've touched on large language models. Now we can't do any of this. We still need humans, right? We still got to have highly skilled human beings to be able to do some of this thinking and think a bit more broadly outside of the box, I'd argue. Now, the government has said, the AI Opportunities Action Plan. Let's draw our attention to this. During the next 5 years, the UK has to be prepared to train tens of thousands of AI professionals, and that's across the technology stack, not just limited to one particular area. Um, what are NVIDIA doing to try and help in this area?
Well, we're doing a lot, actually. I mean, we've been doing it for a long time. We've had something called Deep Learning Institute, which is our training program, which we deliver both physically and virtually to organizations and governments around the world. And we work in collaboration with universities who can take our content and deliver it to students, as much as we work with organizations to empower and enable their training organization to deliver it. To their staff around the world, etc. And I think, you know, we've been talking to the government very much about how they can deploy that for the UK overall. And I think it's really important to think about this in a slightly different way. I think everyone thinks suddenly we need, 1 million PhD data scientists, and that, whilst that would be amazing, the reality is not really that. So yes, we need to encourage more people to do PhDs in data science. That's a great skill, and particularly from a UK point of view, we would like to see obviously more people in that field and support them in doing so. But also, we have to transform and educate and enable the existing workforce through this transformation. And there's an opportunity there to reskill the UK workforce, organisations, some of the biggest employers, people like Jaguar Land Rover is one of our key customers in the UK. We work closely with them, and they're starting to deploy things like DLI for their organisation. So there's a real opportunity to really transform organisations by educating the existing workforce. Another good area to think about is data science. A lot of people have the data science job sort of title in many organizations. Pharmaceuticals is a great one. And those people are used to doing quite traditional data science. It doesn't take too much sort of to re-educate them into the field of AI and take those skills and really deploy it. But at a very basic level, we're all becoming somebody who uses AI. You and I use AI. I'm sure you use ChatGPT or any other models that are out there. Um, we just need to know, understand it, and how to use it for the best results. And that's really the simplest way of looking at it. There are lots of layers to educating the existing workforce and how they transform the work that they do. And that's really at a basic level, understanding what AI is, how to do some basic prompt tuning, how to make sure you realize what it's going to deliver for you, how you may need to apply it to your own data, and obviously the security around that, and equally then up the skill levels to the top data scientists. So I think it's a holistic view that needs to be developed. And it's something NVIDIA is very passionate about. We work with lots of organizations around the world on this. And we're very keen to see this develop more in the UK.
Great stuff. Great stuff. And I don't think it's past the industry. And actually, this is not just an AI data center challenge. This is more broad across multiple sectors. Is how we're going to um, how we're going to do more good in terms of one, education once people are here, but actually once the other topic I think is really important is, well, how do we get people here in the first place? So there's a two-pronged attack I can sense going on right here, right now. Um, Fascinating conversation, David. Thank you. I just want to return back though. I've got to go back to what you said at the start, and your career journey. And I'd like maybe a little bit of wisdom from you, if I may. And sort of, what one piece of advice would you give that younger David, maybe 10 or 15, 20 years ago? What would be the one thing you'd be telling yourself?
I think is to be really open to the possibility of markets that don't exist. I think you're brought up in the sort of business world, and whatever you go study to do sort of analysis on existing markets and business models and all those things. And what's really I've realized, particularly while working in NVIDIA, where we work on these sort of billion-dollar markets, things that don't exist, go make a market, is actually all that information doesn't really have any sort of truth in it. So actually go back to first principles. One of the key things we do in NVIDIA is let's understand the problem. Let's understand how we would address that problem, and then how we would take that to address a need in society, and work from first principles upwards. That allows you to make new markets. And it's always interesting. People ask us about competition in NVIDIA, and we say, yeah, competition is great. But actually, in the market when we're making, there is no competition because we're making a new market. Clearly, other people will join us, and that's great, and that develops the market, and that scales the options for customers, etc. But actually, if you think about from a business point of view, making new markets makes perfect sense because you're starting from scratch. You get the lead on that market, and you get to develop it yourself. And that's something that I've learned in the last number of years.
Fascinating. So we've gone through quite a bit today, haven't we? We've spoken about AI, the use of AI in healthcare. We've spoken a little bit around Europe and governments across Europe and what they're doing, and what we see as the next evolution, if you like, of AI, and also talking about the skills opportunity that exists to help us accelerate at pace, and that final piece of wisdom, which is go find new business models. So, David, thank you. It's been a real pleasure.
Thank you.